Hi, thank you for joining my Patreon. Your support means so much, even a tiny bit, even just like $1 a month is going to help a tremendous amount. So thank you very much and welcome to the first bonus video that you get as a Patreon supporter. This is a companion piece to Second Decade, Episode 5, Jefferson in Winter, and it's going to be more on Jefferson and Sally Hemings. This is really more about the 1780s than it is about the 18 teens. So that's why it's good as an adjunct piece. The question of whether Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings were lovers has been an extraordinarily contentious question. And until about the last 20 years, was thought of as more as rumor, but now it's unquestionable fact. So why is this so hard? Why has this been such a hard question? And I think it's really about Americans and their difficulty in accepting how fundamental slavery really was to our society. Not just if slavery wasn't just tolerated and it wasn't just something that happened in the South, but the North was intimately involved in slavery, directly profited from slavery for decades. It's woven into the very fabric of American society and democracy. Accepting Thomas Jefferson as the father of Sally Hemings' children means not only did he tolerate slavery, but it was right there. It was in his bedroom for 38 years, and that's hard for people, I think, to accept. And I think it's hard to accept because we expect Thomas Jefferson to be morally consistent. This is the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence. He's this great bronze statue in Washington, D.C., and we keep wanting to solve, I put that in quotes, solve Thomas Jefferson as if he was a riddle. Which is how we get books like this one, American Sphinx by Joseph Ellis. I do not like this book. I think these kinds of books that want to figure out Thomas Jefferson just completely miss the point. You can't solve Thomas Jefferson. There's too much complexity. There's too many contradictions there. So you can't solve Thomas Jefferson. You can't make him consistent. Don't try. That's my advice. Slavery really twists and distorts pretty much everything it touches. Slavery is impossible to defend in any kind of logical or rational way, and expecting Jefferson, who was a very logical and rational man, to have some kind of moral consistency about slavery, an indefensible concept, an irrational concept, that is just absurd. I think it's just absurd. So that's my view. So this question of did Thomas Jefferson in fact father the children of Sally Hemings, a slave woman? Absolutely. No question whatsoever. In 1998, there was a DNA study done comparing some genetic material from one of Sally Hemings' sons and known male descendants of Thomas Jefferson. It showed a perfect match. The DNA study, there's always a little bit of uncertainty in these studies. The DNA study gets you to almost 100% certainty. But considering the DNA in conjunction with the historical evidence gets you over that 100% threshold. Considering the two of those in conjunction with each other means there is no doubt. There is just no doubt whatsoever. He was the father of Sally Hemings' children, all of them. Just accept it. So what do we know about this actually in the historical record? Riffing a little bit off the story in Second Decade, Episode 5, we have to consider the Sally Hemings issue in conjunction with Thomas Jefferson's other girlfriend, Maria Cosway. She was Italian-born. She lived in England. She was a painter, also the wife of another painter named Richard Cosway. And Thomas Jefferson met her in Paris, and they had a very hot and heavy affair. This was in the summer of 1786. Incidentally, some historians deny this too. They deny that Thomas Jefferson was actually intimate with Maria Cosway, I think that stance is ridiculous. I think it's just ridiculous. It's very clear. It is very, very clear from the letters, and we have all the letters. It's very clear that they were in love and that their relationship was physical. So Thomas Jefferson, he was a widow. His wife had died several years before. He was very lonely. He was a very passionate man, and he's here in Paris, this city that he loved, and this very vibrant European society with so many of these cultural influences and beautiful women and wine and all those kinds of things that he loved. Maria Cosway was in a loveless and abusive marriage. Her husband was just a tyrant, a really terrible person. So why not? Why couldn't they get together? I mean, I can understand why historians are reluctant to let Jefferson be the father of Sally Hemings' children, but why we can't let Jefferson and Maria Cosway have a sexual relationship, I don't understand why we can't do that. Clearly. Why is chastity the default position here? It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, Maria Cosway actually is the entire reason why Jefferson and Sally Hemings hooked up. I mentioned this in Second Decade that the plan was for Jefferson sent for his daughter Polly to come join him in Europe. She had to come on a ship to London, not to France, but to London, and then cross the Channel. Originally, she was supposed to be accompanied by a middle-aged nurse, a slave woman, but that woman got pregnant right before the trip, so the Jeffersons, there were some aunts involved here who were planning this on the Virginia side. They decided to send Sally Hemings in the place of that nurse. So late June 1787, the ship carrying Polly and Sally Hemings docks in London. Jefferson had written to his friends John and Abigail Adams, who were then living in London. He wrote to them to go pick them up, to go pick up his daughter. The original plan was that the slave accompanying Polly was not even supposed to come to Paris. She was going to go back on the first ship to Virginia. But however, Thomas Jefferson did not, as the Adams expected, go to London to meet his daughter. Why not? Well, we don't know for sure, but he was probably waiting for Maria Cosway to arrive in Paris so they could rekindle their affair, so to speak. So Polly and Sally Hemings stayed with the Adamses. Finally, Jefferson sent one of his French servants, not a slave, but one of his French servants to fetch them in London. The servant could not arrange for Sally to go back, so she just went with them to Paris. So I talked about, in Second Decade, I talked about Sally Hemings' family and her parentage. That's in the main episode. She was the daughter of John Wales, who was Thomas Jefferson's father-in-law. That was Sally Hemings' father, and her mother was Betty Hemings, a slave. Sally was about 7/8 white. She did not look African-American. She had significant African-American heritage, but she did not look She was very light-skinned and did not appear at first glance to be African-American. She probably resembled Martha Wales Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson's late wife. She was 15, and yes, to us there is this definite creep factor. Okay, I admit that. A creep factor, 45-year-old man shacking up with a 15-year-old girl. By our standards today, that would be unacceptable. We can't get around that, but that was the reality of their relationship. So what happened to Maria Cosway? Well, early in December 1787, she and Thomas Jefferson broke up. Why? We don't know, but we do know that she was supposed to go back to London, and on her last day in Paris, they spent the night together. Thomas Jefferson was supposed to have breakfast with her before she left that next morning, but for reasons unknown, she gets up at 5 a.m. and leaves without saying goodbye to him. They continued to write to each other for years, but they never actually got back together and never saw each other in person again. So was he seeing Sally Hemings at this time, December 1787? There's no way to know. Personally, I think not. I think they were not together at this time. I think he started seeing her after the breakup with Maria Cosway. Certainly, he was seeing her in 1788. Throughout 1788, Thomas Jefferson spending money on Sally for fancy clothes and that sort of thing. He's also paying wages to her, also paid wages to her brother. At one point, while he was away from Paris on business, he paid some friends to put Sally up at their house while he was gone. Curious bit, there's exhaustive records of correspondence, all of Jefferson's correspondence, all his letters, both to and from, because he had that nifty copy machine that I talked about in a second decade. 43 years of letters, but in all of that time, in all 43 years, there's one index volume missing from the correspondence. Guess which one it is? It's the volume for the letters for 1788. There's a suspicion, and this is, again, only a suspicion, that someone scrubbed his letters of any clues about Sally Hemings, and that probably happened after he was dead. So Sally did not have her first child until they returned to Monticello in 1789. Thomas Jefferson recorded in his ledgers the births of all the slave children born on his plantations. And when he did this, he always noted the name of the father, except for Sally Hemings' children. He left that blank. That's the only slave that he ever did that for, the only notation that he ever did that. So she had 6, possibly 7 children by him. We're not sure because there were some children who died in infancy. First one, for example, in 1789 died as an infant. There were 4 children that she had by him who lived to adulthood. Beverly, and remember Beverly is a man, not a woman. So Beverly, Harriet, Madison, and Eston. The famous deal that I talked about in the episode, if Sally Hemings returned to Monticello, Thomas Jefferson agreed he would free her kids when they reached the age of 21. And everybody, including Sally, would be freed upon his death. Also, her brother James was part of this deal. This deal was largely honored. Beverly ran off. He escaped from Monticello in 1822. Thomas Jefferson did not lift a finger to get him back, to do anything to pursue him. Harriet also ran away. Sally Hemings was sort of unofficially freed by Jefferson's daughter, Martha. The official procedure for manumission in Virginia was very rigorous and might have exposed the affair, so that's probably why she was unofficially freed. But Sally lived in Charlottesville near Monticello as a free woman until her death about 1835. Sally Hemings' descendants were eventually classified in census records as white. Several of them, for instance, served in the Union Army. One of them was a colonel, I believe, during the Civil War. So does this matter? Is this just trivia? Is it just salacious gossip? No, it really does matter. The relationship between Sally Hemings and Thomas Jefferson does matter. Annette Gordon Reed, in her book, The Hemings of Monticello, wonderful book, really the seminal text on this. I have met Dr. Gordon Reed. She's really an American treasure. She's just wonderful. She argues that this places African Americans, and particularly slave women, at the center of American founding, the center of the American founding story. And denying the Thomas Jefferson-Sally Hemings connection, denying that relationship excludes African-American women from that story. So it's not just gossip. It really is a very important part of American history. So that's my spiel on Jefferson and Sally Hemings. Thank you again for becoming a patron. I really appreciate your support. And we'll see you on the podcast and in future bonus episodes. Thanks.